Hi there. This lesson is about solving quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. So you should already know how to solve a quadratic equation by factorising. But sometimes it's just not possible to factorise it, or you've tried really hard and even though you could factorise it, you haven't been able to work out how to factorise it. And so the quadratic formula allows us to solve quadratic equations when we can't factorise them. Okay, now the quadratic formula is this crazy thing that I've written on the screen here. So by the end of this lesson, you should be able to use that crazy formula at the bottom there. The bad news for you as well is that you need to learn this formula. So basically, every time I use that formula, I'm going to write it down and then fill it in. Partly because that's good practice and it will make me get it right, but also it helps me to learn it and means I've got less learning to do later on in the course. Okay, so let's first of all talk about what on earth that formula means. So I've written it out here. And basically, if I've got a quadratic equation and I've got a number here, a number here, and a number here, then what I do is put those numbers into this crazy formula, and we'll talk about how that works in a second. And that will calculate those two x values that I will need to solve that equation. So last lesson we did that by factorising and solving those two equations. This time this formula here is going to create those two answers for me. But before we use that formula, we've got to think about what on earth all of this means. So I'm going to start with this bit here, and I'm going to give you a quadratic equation. So let's take this one. X squared plus 5x plus 7 equals 0. So here's my quadratic equation, and I've done what I did last lesson. I've tried to factorise it and I've failed, so now I need another plan, and the quadratic formula is my other plan. So the first thing I've got to look at is these numbers here and decide what are a, b and c. So a is just the number I have multiplied x squared by, so we call that the coefficient. That coefficient is just a word for the number I'm multiplying by. So basically, how many x squareds do I have? Well, if I look here, I haven't got a number here, but how many x squareds do I have? Well, I've got 1 x squared, because remember there could be a 1 there if I wanted there to be. So that's telling me for this particular equation that a is 1. Next up, b is the coefficient of x, the number I've multiplied x by. Well, if I look in front of this x, I've multiplied it by 5, so I think that b is 5. Now I just need to be a little bit careful. I need to make sure that it's positive 5, and there's a plus sign here, so that is positive, so I can write b as 5. And c is the number I'm adding on at the end. So in this case, I think c is 7. Okay, let's do another one. So here's my next equation. And again, what's a, what's b, and what's c? So remember, a was the number in front of the x squared, but there isn't a number in front of the x squared. So in my head, I remember that I'm multiplying by 1, so the coefficient of x squared is 1, so a is 1. Next up, b is the coefficient of x, the number I'm multiplying x by, and this time I need to just be careful about that minus sign there, and I need to remember to pick that up when I write down b. So b is minus 5, c is the number I'm adding on at the end, so c is 11. Let's do another one. So this time the number in front of the x squared, the coefficient of x squared is 3, the coefficient of x is 7, and the number at the end, be careful this time because there's a minus sign there, so I need to make sure I write that c is minus 8. And the only other thing you need to just watch out for is occasionally they'll do that mean thing where they check you're paying attention and they don't write it in the right format. Remember, there's nothing we can do with a quadratic when it's equal to something other than 0. So the first thing I'm going to do is put it in the right format. And then I can write down, well, the coefficient of x squared is 1, the coefficient of x is 5, and the number I'm adding at the end, well, I'm not adding, I'm taking away, so it needs to be negative 17. Okay, so far we've learnt to work out what a, b and c are. Now we're going to learn to use this crazy formula here with our a, b and c values so that we can work out the solutions to that equation, the x values. So I've allowed myself a whole page for this, just in case. Now there's often a clue in the question that you're going to need to use this formula rather than factorising, because often we need to use the formula because there's decimal numbers, or if you're going to, some of you will do this in surds, some of you will just do it in decimal places. So anything in the question that talks about decimal places or surds, remember a surd is just a square root number, gives you a clue that actually you're not going to be able to factorise it, because I can't factorise with decimal numbers. We've only learnt to factorise with whole numbers. So there's your clue in the question that maybe I need to use the formula. So here's my equation I'm going to solve. Next up, we need to know, how do we use this? So firstly, I'm going to do what I did on the last page. I'm just going to work out what A, B and C are. So I think A is 1, B is 4 and C is 2. In this case, I'm desperately hoping this is going to work. Next up, we write out this whole crazy formula, because somehow or other I've got to pack it into my head and learn it. So the more often I write it out, the more likely I am to be able to learn it. So I've written that formula out, and as with all formulas, the first thing I do after I've written it out is I start filling it in. So let's have a look at what it says. Well, firstly, it says negative b, minus b. So I look at my b value over here, that's 4, and so minus 4 is what I write there. Then there's this crazy plus minus thing, which we'll deal with later. We'll worry about that in a second. And then there's this huge big square root, and inside that square root it says b squared. Well, remember b was 4, so I'm going to write 4 squared. Then it says take away 4. Then it says a. Well, a is 1, and remember 4a means 4 times a, so I'm going to write 4 times 1, and then times 2, because c is 2. On the bottom it says 2a, so I'm going to do 2 multiplied by a, which is 1. So let's just recap everything I just did there, and let's make sure that that made sense. So all I did was, firstly, I did what I did on the page before, and I worked out what a, b and c were. Next up, I wrote out the formula, because that helps me to remember it and get everything in the right place. And then this says negative b. So I took b and I made it negative, so I've got minus 4. I wrote the crazy plus minus thing, which we'll work out in a second. Then it says b squared, so I wrote 4 squared. Then it says minus 4 times a times c. That's what that means. So I wrote minus 4 times 1, because that's a, times 2, because that's c. And on the bottom, I've got 2a, so I did 2 times 1. Happy so far? Next up, let's sort that out a little bit. So let's do the bits that are easy. 2 times 1 on the bottom, that's just 2, so I'm just going to sort that out. I'm going to leave this bit alone because we haven't decided what that means yet. 4 squared, I think I know 4 squared, that's 16. And 4 times 1 is 4, times 2 is 8. And remember, BODMAS tells me to do my squaring and my multiplying before I do my subtracting. So I've worked out my squaring and I've worked out all this multiplying and left it there. And actually, I reckon I could do 16 take away 8 as well. So I'm going to do that and then worry about the hard stuff. 16 take away 8 is 8. And that's 2. So hopefully you're happy so far. All I've done so far, it's a crazy formula, but all I've done so far is filled stuff in and tidied it up a little bit. Now, at this point, you've got 2 options. Some of you are just going to be asked to just give your answer to 2 decimal places. So what we're going to do is discuss what this means and work out how to give our answer to 2 decimal places. And then if you need to give your answer as a surd instead, then I'll deal with that bit. But some of you can just switch off your brains while we do that bit. Okay? So this plus minus basically means there are 2, in the video we just did, we remember that there are 2 answers to every quadratic equation. So this plus and this minus are basically a shortcut way of writing the 2 answers more quickly. And all this means is that the 2 answers, one of them is all this stuff with a plus sign, and the other of them is all that stuff but with the minus sign. So it's just basically a shorthand way of writing the 2 answers all in one go. So one of the answers is minus 4 plus square root of 8 all divided by 2, and the other answer is minus 4 minus square root of 8 all divided by 2. So these are my 2 answers. Now, they're both x values because we had x in our equation. If I've just been asked to give my answer to 2 decimal places, what I'm just going to do is put each answer into my calculator. Minus 4 plus, I don't know, you can't really see that because of the shadow. I'll hold it up in a second. Square root 8 on the top and 2 on the bottom. Let me see if I can get that so you can see it. That's a bit better. So I have just put this into my calculator. I'm going to press equals and press the SD button if I've been asked to give my answer to 2 decimal places I'm going to round that to minus 0.59. To get this one, I'm going to do the same thing, but instead of a plus sign, I need a minus sign. So I've just put that with the minus sign into my calculator. I'm going to press equals, press the SD button, and my other answer is negative 3.41. So these are my two answers to the quadratic equation. Okay, so I'll write both of those on the solution line. Now, if you haven't been asked to do the bit in surds, you can skip through the next bit or just switch off while I do the bit in surds. Some of you will be asked to be able to rather than give it as 2 decimal places, to leave your answer as a surd. So if that's you, this bit's for you. So the two things we had were this. Oh, no, we had them separately. I'll start again. We had minus 4 plus square root of 8 divided by 2. And those of you who've done some surds will know that actually I need to simplify this square root 8. So I need to think of a multiplication sum that gives me the answer 8, including a square number. And I hope that you will know that we would write that as square root 4 times square root 2. And then square root 4 we know, that's just 2. So it gives me negative 4 plus 2 square root 2 divided by 2. And I might be quite proud of myself and think I've finished and I've simplified things. But actually, if I look at the whole of this top line and the whole of the bottom line, I can divide top and bottom by 2. So I probably ought to do that to tidy it up even more. And 2 divided by 2 is 1. So 2 divided by 2 is 1. And actually, I don't need to write that, do I? That would be tidier if I didn't write that at all. And the same thing with the one with the negative sign. I don't need to do all the maths again because it's the same maths as over here with the minus sign. So this one simplifies to negative 2 minus root 2. Okay. Now, if you were not listening to the surds bit, you need to tune your head back in again. We're going to do another one. So here's my second one, and we're going to do that a little bit quicker this time. So firstly, my A value is 3, my B value is negative 4, don't forget to pick up the minus sign, and my C value is negative 5, pick up the minus sign. Write the formula out. And now we need to fill it in. I'm going to slow down a little bit here because there's some new things. So remember, this said negative B. So I need to do negative 4. Minus 4. Well, when I do a minus, I get a positive. So negative 4 becomes positive 4, plus or minus. And then B squared. So this time I'm squaring negative 4. Now I'm just going to put that in brackets because those of you who know about your calculators will know that we need to be really careful putting minus signs into our calculator and make sure it squares it well. So the safest thing to do if I'm putting any negative stuff into a calculator and I want to square stuff is to put it in brackets. So good practice means that I always write my minus signs, my negative numbers in brackets, just in case I'm putting it into a calculator. Although I tend to do quite a lot of this in my head before I've started talking and not concentrated. So then I am doing minus 4 multiplied by A multiplied by C, and I'm going to put my minus 5 in brackets here, and 2 times A, and A is 3. So again, I've just filled in my formula fairly badly in my case. And now I'm going to do a little bit of tidying up. So on the bottom, 2 times 3 is 6. And on the top, negative 4 times negative 4, I think gives me positive 16. And if you're going to get a mess, put it in your calculator. But don't forget, if you're squaring negative numbers, you need to put the negative number in brackets to make it square it well. Then there's a minus sign, and then I do this multiplication here. Now, if you're going to mess it up in your head and you've got a calculator, you can just put it straight into your calculator. If you can do it in your head, obviously it would be better to do it in your head. Now, 4 times 3 is 12, and then 12 times negative 5, I think gives me negative 60. So we are really doing, and here's where it will go wrong if it goes wrong at all. So I did minus 4 squared gave me positive 16. Then there's a takeaway sign from here. And then I did the 4 times the 3 times the minus 5, and that gave me minus 60. So in here I'm doing 16 minus 60. And hopefully you know that that is the same as doing 16 plus 60, which gives me 76 in here. You can't see that. So again, if you're just being asked to do it as a decimal, now I just put all of that into my calculator. In fact, first I need to remember that that needs splitting up, because I can't put this in my calculator. My calculator doesn't understand. So I need to split it up into the two options. And remember, that symbol just meant there are two options, one with a plus sign and one with a minus sign. Now I've got my two options, I can put those into my calculator. So in my calculator here, I want 4 plus square root 76 on the top, and I want 6 on the bottom. And if you're just being asked for it as a decimal, that gives me 2.12 if I round that to 2 decimal places. And the other one gives me minus 0.79, and these are my two options for my x values. So both of those answers go on the bottom line. Okay, now if you haven't been asked to do this in surds, you're now going to tune out for a few seconds. And if you have been asked to do it in surds, we need to tidy these up without a calculator. So I need a multiplication for 76 with a square number in it. I'm hoping, well, I know 4 times 20 is 80, so I know 4 times 19. So I could rewrite the 76 as square root 4, square root 19. And the square root 4 is 2, so I hope that you're happy I'm tidying that up like this. And I've run out of space again, but look, I think on the top line that all divides by 2 and that divides by 2, so I'm going to divide top and bottom by 2, and that's my simplified final answer. And remember, over here I had the same thing but with a minus sign, so when I tidy that up for my final answer over here, I'll have the same thing like that. And actually it would be perfectly acceptable to write this as one single thing put back together like that if you want to. If they've left you 2 spaces on the answer line, then write them separately, but it would be okay to write the 2 things combined like that if you prefer. Okay, if you've tuned out on the surds, you're back again for one last example. So A is 2, bit quicker this time because we should be getting better at this, and C is 4. Write out the formula because eventually we'll learn it, and carefully fill it in. So this says minus B, so minus 7. Minus makes positive 7. Going to put my minus sign in brackets just in case I try and put it in my calculator. A is 2 and C is positive 4 this time, and on the bottom 2 times 2. 7 plus or minus, right, negative 7 times negative 7 I reckon gives me 49. And remember again, if you're putting it in your calculator because you can't work it out, make sure you put your minus sign and your 7 inside these brackets so it squares it well. Leave the minus sign and then do 4 times 2, that's 8. 8 times 4, 32. And on the bottom, 2 times 2 is 4. 49, take away 32, I think it's 17. And so I'm up to there. Now, if I've been asked to do it as decimal places, remember I'm going to split it up. One with a plus sign, one with a minus sign. And then, oh, you can't see that. There you go. One with a plus sign, one with a minus sign. Then grab my calculator and put in one with a plus sign. Press the SD button, 2.78. And one with a minus sign, and I'm just going back and changing that plus to a minus, save me typing it all in again. And That gives me 0.72 to 2 decimal places. If you are asked to leave it as a surd, then hopefully those of you who are doing surds will have realised that actually I can't think of a multiplication sum for square root 17. So I think it's as simple as it can get, if I can copy it right. So as simple as it can get. So if I was asked to leave it as a surd, then I would leave it like that. And remember, I've got both solutions in there. I can write them as one, or I can write them as two separate ones. Oh, I copied that wrong too, look. So I best go back and correct that. Oh, I did it right on my calculator, look. I put the 4 in the calculator, I just wrote a 2 rather than a 4. Okay, so hopefully you've got your head a little bit round how to solve these quadratic equations by using the formula. If you have a choice, if you can factorise it, it is usually much quicker to factorise it. So if you can factorise it, please do. But if you can't factorise it, then use the formula. And you've now got a set of questions to practice. They'll take you forever to get started, and you'll get quicker as you go on. But don't be surprised if it takes you a long time to do the first few.